13 steps to stop self-doubt that costing you years of your life and prosperity. You are not failing because you are incapable. You are failing because you keep arguing with your own potential. Self-doubt is not just a feeling. It's a habit, a neurological loop that convinces your mind to question what your soul already knows to be true. Every time you hesitate, every time you second-guess an idea, your brain releases a mix of cortisol and fear-based dopamine, reinforcing the belief that safety is more important than growth. It's a cycle that steals years from your life, disguised as caution. The tragedy is that no one tells you where self-doubt really lives. It doesn't sit in your thoughts. It hides deeper, in your nervous system. It lives in the microsecond between your intention and your action, where the body waits for permission from the mind that never comes. And while you wait, opportunities pass, confidence fades, and the world quietly moves forward without you. Jordan Peterson often says that self-doubt is the byproduct of chaos, a sign that the mind lacks structure. Without internal order, your thoughts become tyrants, constantly debating your worth. But Descartes would add something crucial. You think, therefore you exist, meaning that your awareness of doubt is proof of your ability to transcend it. Doubt may visit you, but it does not define you. The mind questions, the soul knows. The problem arises when you start believing that the voice of fear is the voice of truth. Neuroscience tells us that the brain was never built for endless uncertainty. Andrew Huberman's research shows that the human nervous system interprets the unknown as potential danger, triggering the same survival mechanisms that once kept our ancestors alive. But in the modern world, that same mechanism paralyzes you. You're no longer running from predators. You're running from possibilities. And every time you retreat, the brain learns that hesitation equals safety. The longer you feed that pattern, the harder it becomes to break free. The invisible prison of the mind isn't made of walls. It's made of familiar thoughts. You've walked the same neural paths so many times that they've become comfortable, predictable, even when they hurt you. And like any prison, the key has always been within reach. The question is, will you stop waiting for permission to use it? Joe Dispenza describes change as the moment when you stop remembering your limitations and start rehearsing your potential. The moment when you stop identifying with the story that says, "I'm not ready," and begin embodying the truth that readiness is created, not granted. Confidence isn't something you find. It's something you build through action. This video is not about motivation. It's about reprogramming the biological roots of self-doubt and reintroducing you to the structure of faith, not religious faith, but trust in your own design. Over the next 13 steps, you will learn how to dismantle the architecture of hesitation using the same principles that built it: repetition, awareness, and direction. You'll see how every doubt has a source in your chemistry, your conditioning, or your perception, and how all three can be rewritten. The invisible prison is not permanent. It exists only as long as you keep believing the walls are real. By the end of this journey, you'll realize something most people never discover: that self-trust is not arrogance, it's alignment. It's the moment when thought, emotion, and purpose begin to move as one. So before we begin, ask yourself one question. How many years have you already lost to doubt? Because today, that clock stops ticking. Awareness is liberation. Self-doubt thrives in darkness, not because it is powerful, but because it is hidden. The moment you see it clearly, its grip begins to weaken. Awareness is the first act of liberation, because what you can observe, you can change. Most people never pause long enough to notice the exact moment when doubt takes hold. It begins as a whisper, almost imperceptible, a faint question that sounds like reason. Are you sure you're ready? But beneath that whisper lies an old neurological pattern. The brain trying to protect you from uncertainty by disguising fear as logic. Andrew Huberman explains that awareness activates the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making and self-regulation. When you become conscious of your internal dialogue, you interrupt the amygdala's automatic fear response. In that instant, biology shifts. Cortisol begins to lower, the nervous system stabilizes, and the emotion that once controlled you becomes data, something to study rather than obey. This is where cognitive behavioral therapy begins, identifying the thought, labeling it, and separating it from identity. You are not the voice that doubts, you are the one hearing it. Jordan Peterson often reminds us that order emerges from voluntary confrontation with chaos. Awareness is that confrontation. When you choose to face your uncertainty head-on, to analyze its origins instead of avoiding it, you re-establish dominance over your own mind. This is not arrogance, it's alignment. The Stoics practiced this with radical clarity. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal not to inspire others but to discipline himself, to dissect fear until it lost its form. That's what awareness does. It strips doubt of mystery. Once you can describe it, you can direct it. Descartes taught that the act of thinking proves existence. Awareness expands that proof. The act of observing thought proves sovereignty. The moment you can say, "I see this doubt forming," you reclaim authorship. You move from being a prisoner of thought to the thinker himself, deliberate, conscious, unshaken. And once awareness arrives, transformation becomes inevitable, because the brain cannot unsee what the mind has illuminated. Joe Dispenza's research on neuroplasticity confirms this. When you observe a limiting belief without judgment, the neural connections supporting it begin to weaken. Awareness dissolves the emotional charge that sustains the pattern. Each moment of observation becomes a small act of rewiring, proof that consciousness itself is the most powerful tool for change. You don't destroy doubt by fighting it. You transcend it by seeing it for what it is, a habit of thought maintained by inattention. Awareness, then, is not passive reflection. It's active rebellion. Every time you notice the voice of fear and choose not to obey, you expand the boundaries of freedom within your mind. The prison door doesn't open with motivation. It opens with recognition. You begin to see the pattern, the trigger, the thought, the feeling, the reaction. And once you see it, you can break it. From this point forward, doubt will still speak, but its voice will sound different. You'll recognize it not as truth, but as history, a remnant of who you used to be. Awareness liberates you from that history. It makes space for the emergence of who you are becoming. Rewriting the narrative loop. Every human being lives inside a story, a mental film constantly playing in the background of consciousness. It tells you who you are, what you deserve, and what you're capable of. The tragedy is that for most people, this story was written by fear. Self-doubt doesn't just appear, it's scripted through repetition. Every time you hesitate, every time you stop yourself from acting, you reinforce the same narrative. I can't. I'm not ready. I'm not enough. Over time, these phrases become neurological truth. The brain, shaped by repetition, starts mistaking these thoughts for identity. You're no longer doubting your actions. You're doubting your existence. Neuroscience calls this the narrative loop, the brain's tendency to repeat what's familiar, because it equates familiarity with safety. Andrew Huberman explains that neurons wire together. When a thought pattern is repeated often enough, the brain conserves energy by automating it. This means that if you've spent years rehearsing self-doubt, your mind will trigger it automatically every time you face something new. You think you're being cautious, but biologically, you're just repeating an old script. The good news is that the brain is plastic. It can be rewritten. Joe Dispenza's research shows that to reprogram these patterns, you must first interrupt them. Awareness, as you learned before, opens the door. But rewriting the story requires intention, the act of consciously authoring new meaning. When you replace the thought, "What if I fail?" with "What can I learn if I try?" you begin creating a new neural circuit. Each repetition of that thought strengthens the pathway of courage and weakens the pathway of fear. Over time, your brain's predictive model shifts. It no longer expects loss, it anticipates growth. Jordan Peterson often says that meaning is the antidote to chaos. When your story has no structure, doubt rushes in to fill the void. To rewrite the narrative, you must give your life a direction so strong that fear loses relevance. Aristotle called this telos, purpose. The mind craves purpose the way the body craves oxygen. When you give it meaning, confusion becomes clarity. Doubt fades because the mind is no longer asking, "Should I?" but "How can I?" Purpose transforms hesitation into movement. Cognitive behavioral therapy uses this principle in practice. The moment you identify the automatic thought that triggers self-doubt, you write a new one and practice it daily until it becomes the default response. This isn't positive thinking, it's neurological conditioning. The Stoics practiced a similar technique long before psychology gave it a name. Seneca would imagine adversity and respond to it mentally, with calm determination. By doing so, he trained his mind to respond with strength rather than panic. You can do the same with your own story. The key is consistency. Your brain doesn't change because you decide to, it changes because you train it to. Each time you act in defiance of doubt, you prove to your nervous system that the old narrative no longer serves you. Action becomes evidence, evidence becomes identity, and identity becomes your new story. So ask yourself, what story are you still rehearsing that no longer deserves a stage in your life? The moment you stop repeating the script of fear, you begin writing the script of freedom. Your thoughts are the pen, your choices are the ink, and the paper has been waiting for years. The biology of fear. Fear is not abstract. It's not some mysterious force that exists only in the mind. It's chemical, electrical, and measurable. A survival mechanism built into your biology. Your nervous system was designed to protect you from danger, but when it misfires, it protects you from growth instead. The same system that once saved your ancestors from predators now stops you from speaking in public, starting a business, or changing your life. Fear has become overprotective, a guardian that doesn't know when to stand down. When you face uncertainty, the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm, activates instantly. It releases cortisol and adrenaline, preparing your body to fight, flee, or freeze. Your heartbeat rises, your muscles tense, and your vision narrows. This reaction isn't evil, it's instinct. But when it triggers too often, the body begins to live in a state of chronic alertness. Andrew Huberman explains that prolonged cortisol exposure weakens the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logic, planning, and decision-making. In that state, fear literally silences reason. You can't think clearly because your biology has decided thinking is dangerous. That's why self-doubt feels physical. The knot in your stomach, the pressure in your chest, the shallow breathing. These sensations aren't proof that you're incapable. They're proof that your body believes you're under threat. The problem is not fear itself, but misinterpretation. The brain doesn't distinguish between a predator and a possibility. Both look the same neurologically. The key is retraining that response, teaching your biology that uncertainty is not danger, but discovery. This is where awareness becomes practice. When fear rises, your breath becomes the lever. Slow breathing signals the vagus nerve to activate the parasympathetic system, which lowers cortisol and rebalances the mind. In that state, dopamine begins to rise again, the neurotransmitter of motivation and anticipation. The same chemicals that once fueled panic now fuel focus. You can't eliminate fear, but you can redirect it. Jordan Peterson often describes fear as the dragon guarding the treasure you most need to find. To run from fear is to run from your potential. To face it consciously is to rewire your brain to associate discomfort with progress, not danger. The Stoics understood this as well. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is endurable, then endure it. Stop complaining, not as dismissal, but as training." Exposure to manageable fear builds emotional resilience. The more you face, the more your brain learns that the threat was never fatal. It was formative. Joe Dispenza's work on neuroplasticity reveals that every time you act despite fear, you create new synaptic connections that strengthen courage. Faith, in this light, isn't a spiritual abstraction. It's a biological intervention. It tells the brain, we're safe enough to try. Over time, this becomes your new default state. Fear still knocks on the door, but your nervous system no longer invites it inside. To overcome fear, you don't need to destroy it. You need to understand it. It's not a flaw in your design. It's proof that you were designed to evolve. The goal isn't to silence the amygdala, but to teach it new meaning. Each time you move through fear consciously, you send a new message to your biology. Uncertainty is opportunity. The heartbeat that once symbolized panic becomes the rhythm of courage. Fear's power fades when you realize it's not an enemy, but an echo. And when you stop running from that echo, you finally hear what it was trying to tell you. You were never in danger. You were being called to grow. Break the comparison feedback loop. Comparison is one of the most sophisticated traps of self-doubt. It disguises itself as motivation, but functions as poison. The moment you measure your worth against another person's progress, you surrender control of your inner compass. You stop living as a creator and start existing as a spectator. The irony is that comparison doesn't reveal how far you are from others. It reveals how far you've drifted from yourself. Neuroscience explains why this cycle is so hard to escape. The brain's reward system, powered by dopamine, reacts strongly to social validation. Every time you compare yourself and feel either superior or inferior, your brain releases tiny bursts of dopamine that create a subtle addiction. You don't realize it, but you begin seeking that comparison-driven stimulation the same way people crave caffeine or notifications. Andrew Huberman describes this as dopamine misdirection, when the brain learns to associate self-worth not with growth, but with external feedback. Over time, you stop asking, "Am I improving?" and start asking, "Am I better than them?" The moment you do, self-doubt gains power, because your sense of identity becomes dependent on others' performance. Michel de Montaigne warned about this centuries ago. He wrote that envy blinds us to our own gifts, turning us into imitators rather than thinkers. The Stoics shared the same truth. Focus on what's within your control, and you'll never be disturbed by comparison. Marcus Aurelius lived among emperors and conquerors, yet his journal reads like the thoughts of a man determined to master himself, not the world. He understood that peace is not found by winning against others, but by aligning your mind with your purpose. Modern psychology mirrors this wisdom. Daniel Goleman's research on emotional intelligence shows that constant comparison triggers chronic stress responses, raised cortisol levels, increased heart rate, reduced focus. The brain interprets social inferiority as threat, activating the same circuits as physical danger. That's why social media can leave you drained and anxious even when nothing bad has happened. Your nervous system has been trained to compete for survival in a world that no longer requires it. To break the feedback loop, you must shift your metric from external validation to internal integrity. Instead of asking, "How am I doing compared to others?" ask, "How aligned am I with who I want to become?" Each time you choose alignment over comparison, you rewire the neural circuitry of self-worth. Dopamine becomes linked to progress, not approval. Huberman calls this intrinsic reinforcement, the process of training your brain to find reward in effort itself. When you do, the loop collapses. Faith plays a silent but powerful role here. It reminds you that purpose is never measured by pace. Your path unfolds in rhythm with your preparation. When you trust that, urgency turns into patience, and jealousy into admiration. You begin to celebrate growth, yours and others, as evidence that abundance is not limited, but multiplied through awareness. Comparison ends the moment you realize that no one else's timeline applies to you. You are not behind, you are in process. The same sunlight that nourishes one tree at dawn reaches another at noon. What matters is not when it shines, but that it does. The mind addicted to comparison lives in scarcity. The mind anchored in alignment lives in peace. The feedback loop breaks the moment you stop asking who's ahead and start asking whether your next step is honest. Because once you return your focus inward, you'll discover that your competition was never with others. It was always with your own hesitation. Small wins, big circuits. Confidence doesn't arrive in a moment of revelation. It's built in increments. One small decision at a time, one act of courage layered upon the next. The brain doesn't recognize potential. It recognizes patterns. Every time you follow through on a promise to yourself, no matter how small, you strengthen the neural pathways associated with self-trust. This is how confidence is constructed, not through ambition, but through evidence. Andrew Huberman explains that consistency reshapes the brain's reward system. Each completed task releases a controlled pulse of dopamine, reinforcing the behavior that created it. This is the biology of momentum. Action fuels chemistry, and chemistry fuels action. Yet many people remain trapped in self-doubt because they wait for confidence before acting. Neuroscience proves it's the other way around. Confidence doesn't precede action. It follows it. When you move despite fear, your brain recalibrates its identity. You stop being someone who wants to change and become someone who does. Jordan Peterson often emphasizes the moral power of small victories. Clean your room, finish the task, organize one corner of chaos. These are not trivial acts. They are neurological affirmations that order is possible. Each small win proves to your brain that you are capable of directing reality, and that proof expands your sense of agency. This is why people who consistently take micro-actions appear calm under pressure. Their nervous systems have been trained to associate challenge with competence, not fear. The Stoics mastered this long before modern science described it. Seneca wrote that greatness is achieved not by extraordinary acts, but by consistent discipline. He understood that stability comes from repetition, doing what aligns with reason even when emotion resists. Modern psychology calls this behavioral activation, the deliberate act of moving forward when motivation is absent. Every small step you take in defiance of inertia rewires your emotional baseline. Doubt begins to dissolve because your brain is now collecting data that contradicts it. Joe Dispenza explains that the brain cannot differentiate between a small act of integrity and a major breakthrough. What matters is the emotional signature attached to the act. When you celebrate small wins, dopamine levels rise in proportion to the meaning you assign them. This means you can train your brain to experience fulfillment not only in outcomes, but in process. That's how momentum becomes sustainable, when satisfaction comes from movement itself, not from arrival. Faith transforms this practice into purpose. It teaches you to view every small act as sacred, as evidence of alignment between thought and being. Aristotle called this virtue through habit, becoming who you are meant to be by repeatedly acting in accordance with your higher nature. Each small decision reinforces the architecture of that nature until it becomes effortless. So, stop waiting for confidence to appear as motivation. Start building it as memory. Stack enough small wins, and doubt loses its foundation. Each time you act, you teach your nervous system a new truth, that you can trust yourself. And when self-trust becomes your default chemistry, self-doubt has nowhere left to live. Your prosperity doesn't begin with one giant leap. It begins with a single step, taken repeatedly. Every small win is a neural investment in your future self. The question is not whether you'll succeed someday, but whether you'll start building evidence today. The mirror of language. The words you use are not harmless, they are architecture. Every sentence you speak, especially to yourself, builds or breaks the structure of your identity. Language is the mirror through which you see your reflection, and that reflection shapes your belief. Most people destroy their confidence not through failure, but through repetition of self-limiting speech. I can't. I always mess this up. I'm not ready. Phrases like these train the brain to interpret self-doubt as truth. The more often you repeat them, the deeper they carve into the neural circuits of your identity until they become automatic, like a reflex. Cognitive behavioral therapy reveals that thought, emotion, and language form a closed system. The words you choose activate corresponding emotions, and those emotions reinforce the thought. This is how mental loops are sustained. When you change language, you interrupt the loop. Andrew Huberman explains that the brain's auditory cortex and prefrontal regions interact to encode meaning. When you speak something aloud, your body treats it as instruction. So when you declare, "I can't handle this," your physiology obeys, your posture collapses, your breathing shallows, cortisol rises. But if you say, "I can face this," the opposite occurs. The nervous system responds as if preparation, not panic, is needed. Jordan Peterson often emphasizes precision in speech because clarity of language creates clarity of thought. When you speak vaguely, "I'm overwhelmed, everything is falling apart," your brain can't define the problem, so it can't solve it. But when you articulate specifics, "I'm anxious about tomorrow's decision," you give your mind a target. The undefined becomes defined, and with definition comes direction. Descartes understood this principle centuries ago. Precision in reasoning produces precision in existence. When your words become ordered, your world begins to follow. Faith adds another dimension. Spiritual traditions have always treated language as sacred. In the beginning was the Word. Whether you interpret that literally or metaphorically, the meaning remains. Creation begins with articulation. The Stoics practiced this daily through affirmations grounded in logic rather than fantasy. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself every morning of who he wanted to be, not as wishful thinking, but as psychological alignment. Modern neuroscience now validates this. Repeated self-directed language rewires the circuits of identity through neuroplasticity. You become fluent in the person you describe. Joe Dispenza calls this mental rehearsal, using words and imagery to teach your body what the mind wants it to become. When language and emotion synchronize, they send a signal stronger than thought alone. You're not lying to yourself, you're programming a new pattern. The key is congruence, words backed by belief. Affirmations fail when spoken mechanically because the emotional brain doesn't respond to hypocrisy. But when words are embodied, when you speak from conviction rather than hope, the brain receives them as reality. Aristotle believed that virtue is practiced through speech as much as through action. Each truthful declaration refines your character. Each careless word erodes it. So choose your internal dialogue as carefully as you would choose the bricks of a foundation. Replace "I can't" with "I'm learning." Replace "I failed" with "I'm adapting." These are not cliches, they are recalibrations. Over time, the mind internalizes them as fact. The mirror of language reflects the version of you that speaks most often. If your self-talk is rooted in defeat, your reality will echo it. But if your language becomes precise, aligned, and disciplined, self-doubt begins to dissolve. Because when your words serve truth instead of fear, your mind stops arguing with your potential and starts describing it instead. Stop negotiating with fear. Fear is persuasive. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It disguises itself as reason, presenting itself as logic and caution, convincing you that waiting is wisdom. But fear's favorite tactic isn't paralysis, it's negotiation. It doesn't demand you quit. It asks you to delay. It tells you, just wait until you're more prepared. Maybe tomorrow will be better. You're not quite ready yet. And while you negotiate with fear, life moves quietly past you. The opportunity you hesitated to take becomes someone else's beginning. From a neurological perspective, this pattern is predictable. The brain is designed to favor the familiar because safety, to your nervous system, equals predictability. When you face a new challenge, the amygdala fires, releasing cortisol and adrenaline. Your body prepares for battle, but you call it anxiety. Andrew Huberman notes that most people misinterpret this activation as a warning to stop, when in reality, it's a signal to focus. Fear sharpens your senses, increases alertness, and primes your system for performance. The problem isn't the fear itself, it's your negotiation with it. The moment you debate with fear, you turn activation into avoidance. Jordan Peterson teaches that meaning exists on the boundary between order and chaos. Fear appears precisely at that boundary, not to push you back, but to invite you forward. If you retreat, the boundary moves closer, shrinking your world. If you confront it, the boundary expands, and with it, your capacity. The Stoics lived by this principle. Seneca wrote that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the refusal to give it authority. To negotiate with fear is to hand over that authority in small doses until it rules your every decision. Descartes might describe this as a failure of clarity. When the mind loses distinction between rational thought and emotional impulse, it mistakes the noise of instinct for the voice of reason. True clarity arises when you can observe fear without dialogue, when you can see it, acknowledge it, and act regardless. Cognitive behavioral therapy calls this exposure with response prevention, deliberately entering the feared situation and refusing to perform the usual avoidance behavior. Each time you do, the brain learns that the threat was imaginary. Over time, the amygdala quiets, and fear loses its persuasive power. Joe Dispenza explains this process as biological liberation. When you stop negotiating with fear, you interrupt the chemical pattern that sustains it. The flood of cortisol and adrenaline begins to subside, replaced by endorphins and serotonin, neurotransmitters that promote calm focus and confidence. The body literally learns that action is safer than hesitation. Faith completes the circuit. Faith is not blind belief that nothing will go wrong. It's trust that you can handle whatever happens. It's the spiritual form of exposure therapy, walking into uncertainty without demanding reassurance. When faith replaces negotiation, you stop asking fear for permission to live. You begin to move even when your pulse quickens, even when your voice trembles. And in doing so, you prove to your nervous system that you are stronger than the chemical storm inside you. Every time you negotiate with fear, you train it to return. Every time you act without negotiation, you train courage to lead. The difference between hesitation and transformation is not confidence, it's decision. So stop waiting for the perfect moment. Stop bargaining with the voice that only exists to delay you. Fear will always offer conditions for your courage, but courage needs none. The mind becomes free the moment you stop arguing with fear and start walking through it. That's not recklessness, it's responsibility. The responsibility to live the life your hesitation keeps postponing. Reprogramming through vision. You cannot defeat self-doubt with logic alone. You must reprogram it through vision. The human brain doesn't change because you tell it to. It changes because you show it something new to believe in. Vision is not fantasy or daydreaming. It's structured imagination, a deliberate act of mental rehearsal that instructs your nervous system to expect a different future. When you hold a vision with consistency and emotion, your brain begins to wire it as memory. It stops treating your desired future as possibility and starts recording it as familiarity. Joe Dispenza describes this as neuroplastic rehearsal, the act of mentally living a future experience until the brain no longer distinguishes it from reality. This is why elite athletes visualize success before performance and why monks meditate on peace until their physiology mirrors stillness. Andrew Huberman confirms this biologically. The same neurons that fire during action also fire during vivid mental rehearsal. The body begins to adapt before the event occurs. You are, in effect, practicing your future. Jordan Peterson teaches that vision gives chaos direction. Without vision, anxiety fills the void. The mind, uncertain of where to go, fixates on what could go wrong. Fear becomes your map. But when you build a clear picture of who you intend to become, your brain reorganizes around that image. Dopamine circuits reorient toward pursuit instead of avoidance. You begin waking up not to escape failure, but to approach purpose. This is where philosophy meets science. Aristotle believed that everything in nature moves toward its telos, its ultimate purpose. A seed doesn't doubt whether it can become a tree, it simply grows toward the light. The same principle governs the mind. When you fix your gaze on a meaningful vision, your entire being, thought, chemistry, and emotion starts aligning toward it. The Stoics practiced this in their meditations, visualizing virtue, wisdom, or courage, not as ideals, but as attainable states of being. Through repetition, those qualities became their character. To reprogram yourself, you must build a mental world that is more vivid than your fears. This requires emotional engagement, because the brain learns through feeling. If you visualize success without emotion, it's fiction. But if you combine vision with gratitude, the emotional signal of fulfillment, your brain begins to release the same neurotransmitters associated with achievement. Dopamine rises, serotonin stabilizes, endorphins calm the body. You are literally simulating prosperity until your biology accepts it as the new norm. Faith amplifies this process. Faith is sustained vision, the refusal to let go of what you've seen internally, even when external evidence hasn't arrived yet. It's not blind optimism, it's disciplined imagination. You keep rehearsing until belief becomes embodiment. Descartes might describe it as the alignment between perception and truth, when the image in the mind begins to sculpt reality through consistent intention. Your old mental programs were written by repetition. Years of imagining failure, rejection, or inadequacy. You can't erase them by wishing them away. You must overwrite them with stronger, clearer images. Every time you close your eyes and vividly see yourself acting with confidence, speaking with clarity, living with purpose, you're teaching your brain a new identity. Over time, that vision stops feeling like aspiration and starts feeling like memory. Reprogramming through vision means directing your mind instead of drifting in it. It means training your imagination to serve evolution, not fear. The moment you can see your next version vividly enough, the nervous system begins preparing for it as though it already exists. And that's when transformation stops being a concept. It becomes biology. Embody confidence physically. The mind shapes the body, but the body also shapes the mind. Confidence is not only a thought. It's a posture, a rhythm, a physiological state. Long before you speak or act, your body broadcasts signals to your brain about who you believe yourself to be. The nervous system listens closely to those signals. If your shoulders collapse, your gaze drops, and your breathing tightens, your brain interprets that as submission. It releases cortisol, lowers testosterone, and reduces dopamine, a biochemical message that you are unsafe, inferior, or unprepared. This is why chronic self-doubt feels physical. Your body is reinforcing the very mindset you're trying to escape. Andrew Huberman's research in behavioral neuroscience confirms this connection. Body language is not just expression, it's feedback. When you change your physical state, you change your neurochemistry. Standing tall, expanding your chest, and breathing deeply signals to your nervous system that you are in control. This posture triggers the release of serotonin and endorphins, calming fear and restoring focus. Within seconds, your physiology begins to align with the qualities you're attempting to feel. You're not pretending confidence, you're producing it. The Stoics understood this long before science measured it. Epictetus taught that dignity begins in how you carry yourself. He believed that posture was philosophy in motion, a declaration of inner order manifested through the body. Jordan Peterson echoes this when he says, "Stand up straight with your shoulders back." It's not just motivational advice, it's behavioral psychology. You're sending a signal to your own biology that you accept the weight of existence, that you are willing to meet chaos standing, not kneeling. Joe Dispenza explains that emotion is energy in motion, a bridge between thought and body. When you consciously adjust your physical state, you interrupt the emotional signature of fear and replace it with strength. The body learns faster than the mind because it communicates through sensation, not theory. If you act as though you are confident, your nervous system calibrates to match that action. Over time, this becomes a new baseline. Your body begins to default to confidence instead of anxiety. Aristotle wrote that we become virtuous by performing virtuous acts. Confidence follows the same law. You don't wait to feel powerful before you act. You act powerfully until it becomes natural. The repetition of physical strength conditions emotional strength. Each deliberate movement, walking with purpose, breathing with control, speaking with clarity, rewires the neural circuits of identity. Faith deepens this embodiment. When you treat your body as the vessel of purpose rather than the victim of circumstance, every gesture becomes sacred. You begin to move as though your presence has meaning, because it does. That awareness changes the way others respond to you, which in turn reinforces your confidence. The world mirrors the signals your body sends. Embodying confidence physically is not performance. It's practice. You are teaching your nervous system that safety and self-trust coexist. When your body aligns with your belief, the mind stops arguing with itself. The trembling hands steady, the shallow breath deepens. The racing heart synchronizes with calm intention. You are no longer trying to appear confident. You are becoming coherence in motion. And when that coherence stabilizes, doubt loses its authority. Because confidence, in its truest form, is not arrogance. It's the silent agreement between mind and body that says, I am capable. The moment you move in that truth, your biology follows, and the world begins to respond in kind. The role of faith and surrender. Faith is often misunderstood as passive belief, a quiet waiting for something external to change your life. But real faith is not waiting, it's alignment. It's the deliberate choice to trust the process when your senses demand proof. Surrender is not giving up, it's giving over. It's the act of releasing control of outcomes while maintaining full responsibility for effort. Together, faith and surrender form the bridge between intention and peace. From a neurological standpoint, faith stabilizes chaos. Andrew Huberman explains that uncertainty activates the brain's stress circuitry, the amygdala, hypothalamus, and adrenal axis. When outcomes are unpredictable, cortisol surges, and the body enters a defensive state. But when you shift from control to trust, the nervous system relaxes. Dopamine begins to stabilize, serotonin rises, and the prefrontal cortex regains clarity. You move from reaction to regulation. This is not mysticism, it's mechanism. Faith restores the brain's coherence, allowing logic and emotion to coexist without conflict. Joe Dispenza describes surrender as the biological reset of creation. When you stop forcing outcomes and start aligning emotionally with gratitude and trust, the brain and heart enter a state of coherence. Their electromagnetic rhythms synchronize, amplifying focus, intuition, and resilience. You are no longer living from stress hormones, but from elevated neurochemistry. The body learns that uncertainty is not danger, but potential. Jordan Peterson frames this through responsibility. Faith is not the denial of fear. It's the disciplined decision to move forward, despite it. To surrender is to recognize that your duty is to act truthfully, not to manipulate results. This perspective removes the illusion of control, replacing anxiety with clarity. The Stoics knew this intimately. Epictetus taught that peace comes from distinguishing what's within our control, our thoughts, choices, and virtues, from what isn't. Everything beyond that boundary belongs to providence, or as modern science would call it, probability. Faith is the wisdom to live within that boundary with courage. Descartes might describe faith as the extension of reason into the unknown. Where logic ends, faith begins, not to replace knowledge, but but to sustain it where evidence has yet to appear. Faith gives meaning to perseverance. It transforms effort into devotion. Without it, the mind collapses under uncertainty. With it, the mind adapts. In physiological terms, surrender shifts the brain from survival to creativity. When you release the need to predict every outcome, the parasympathetic system activates, lowering stress and increasing cognitive flexibility. New ideas emerge. The problem you once obsessed over begins to solve itself, not because the world changed, but because you stopped resisting its flow. Faith opens the mind. Surrender opens the path. Spiritual traditions have always understood what neuroscience is now proving, that control is the heaviest form of stress. When you cling to it, your body stays trapped in vigilance. When you let go, your biology re-enters harmony. Faith is the nervous system remembering that it doesn't have to fight every unknown. It's the restoration of rhythm between effort and rest, doing and being. To live with faith is to stop measuring progress by certainty and start measuring it by peace. It's realizing that trust itself is a biological skill, one that can be trained, strengthened, and practiced. Each act of surrender teaches your brain that peace is possible even in motion. The role of faith and surrender in dissolving self-doubt is simple but profound. When you stop demanding control, you create space for confidence to grow. Because control is rooted in fear, but surrender is rooted in truth. And truth, when lived fully, doesn't require guarantees. It only requires movement. Environment, the hidden enemy. Self-doubt does not grow in isolation, it feeds on environment. The people you listen to, the spaces you inhabit, and the energy you tolerate become silent architects of your mindset. You can be disciplined, intelligent, and spiritually grounded. Yet if your surroundings are chaotic, cynical, or draining, your confidence will erode slowly and invisibly. The human brain is porous. It absorbs atmosphere like a sponge. And without awareness, your environment will program you before you ever realize it's happening. Andrew Huberman's studies on neuroplasticity show that the brain constantly adapts to its sensory and social context. It tunes itself to the emotional frequencies it encounters most often. When you live in an environment saturated with complaint, comparison, and fear, your neural circuits begin mirroring those states. Your dopamine system dulls, motivation declines, and stress hormones rise. This is not weakness, it's biology. The mind seeks equilibrium with its surroundings. To remain confident in a toxic environment is like trying to breathe deeply in a room with no oxygen. Possible, but unsustainable. Jordan Peterson warns that your environment reflects the order of your inner world. If your physical space is cluttered, your thoughts will follow suit. If your relationships are built on validation instead of authenticity, you'll begin to doubt your worth when validation fades. Confidence is not merely an internal process. It's a dialogue between your mind and the world around you. To change one without addressing the other is incomplete transformation. The Stoics were ruthless in their management of influence. Epictetus taught that you must guard your mind as a soldier guards a gate, because every conversation, every image, every piece of noise that enters becomes material for thought. Seneca warned against spending time with those who normalize mediocrity, because the soul quietly conforms to its company. Modern psychology agrees. Mirror neurons replicate the emotional tone of those around us. Spend enough time near fear, and your body will learn to fear. Spend enough time near courage, and your body will remember strength. Joe Dispenza calls this energetic coherence. Your internal state is constantly negotiating with your external one. When the two are misaligned, when you're trying to heal in an environment that's still sick, progress stalls. The brain can't sustain new patterns if the sensory data contradicts them. Faith, in this context, requires more than belief. It requires boundaries. You must curate what enters your awareness. That doesn't mean isolation, it means intentional exposure. You can't avoid all negativity, but you can refuse to let it define your reality. Descartes might describe this as the discipline of perception. to doubt what deserves doubting, and to protect what is certain. You can doubt your fears, your assumptions, even your failures, but never your right to peace. Aristotle would call this virtue by environment, the idea that good character is nurtured through proximity to what uplifts the soul. The environment you choose becomes the soil for your potential. So take inventory. Look around your workspace, your home, your circle of influence. Ask yourself honestly, does this environment remind me of who I want to be, or of who I used to be? If it reflects the past, it's not your home anymore. It's your history. Clean it, redefine it, rebuild it, because self-trust doesn't flourish in noise, it grows in alignment. Environment is the hidden enemy of growth when left unexamined, but once mastered, it becomes your greatest ally. Create surroundings that echo your clarity, and soon your mind will rise to match it. Gratitude as neural armor. Gratitude is not just an emotion. It's a neurological state that rewires the brain against fear, stress, and doubt. When you experience genuine gratitude, your body releases a biochemical symphony that directly counteracts the chemistry of anxiety. Dopamine and serotonin rise, cortisol drops, and the prefrontal cortex, the seat of reason, clarity, and emotional regulation, comes back online. It's as if gratitude tells your brain, you are safe enough to grow. In that safety, self-doubt begins to dissolve. Andrew Huberman's research shows that gratitude must be specific and embodied to be effective. It's not about forcing optimism or pretending everything is fine. It's about remembering real experiences of grace, moments when something or someone impacted you unexpectedly for the better. When you recall those moments vividly, your brain replays the emotional signature of safety and connection. That experience becomes a protective layer over the nervous system, shielding it from the corrosive effects of chronic stress. This is what we mean by neural armor. Gratitude literally fortifies your biology against the assaults of fear. Jordan Peterson connects this to meaning. Gratitude transforms suffering into significance. When you choose to focus not on what was lost, but on what was learned, you extract wisdom from pain. The Stoics lived by this principle. Marcus Aurelius, amidst war and loss, wrote that gratitude was not a mood, but a discipline, the act of recognizing that life itself is participation in something greater. For him, gratitude was moral structure, the refusal to let adversity dictate perception. Modern neuroscience now validates this ancient insight. A grateful mind is more resilient because it interprets challenge as growth rather than punishment. Joe Dispenza explains that when you combine gratitude with intentional focus, you create neurochemical coherence. The body shifts from survival to creation. Instead of reacting to fear, you begin to generate calm. The energy once consumed by worry becomes available for clarity, creativity, and healing. Gratitude trains your attention to notice abundance, and what the mind consistently notices, it amplifies. The neural circuits of appreciation grow stronger with use, just as the circuits of doubt weaken with neglect. Descartes might frame gratitude as the triumph of awareness over illusion, a conscious acknowledgement of what is real over what is feared. Faith gives it direction. To be grateful when everything is certain is simple. To be grateful amid uncertainty is mastery. Gratitude in chaos reclaims your sovereignty. It proves that your peace is internal, not circumstantial. Aristotle called gratitude the mother of all virtues because it organizes the moral life around humility. It reminds you that no achievement is entirely your own, that every step forward was supported by something larger, whether divine providence, human kindness, or sheer persistence. That recognition dissolves pride, which is the twin of doubt. When you are humble, you no longer need to prove, and when you no longer need to prove, confidence flows naturally. Practicing gratitude daily isn't sentimentality, it's strategic. Begin with one reflection. What today protected me, guided me, or taught me? Relive it, not as thought, but as experience. Feel the warmth, the relief, the expansion. In that moment, your brain is reconditioning itself for trust. Gratitude doesn't erase pain, it redefines it. It reminds you that even in difficulty, you are guided, supported, and capable. And that awareness, repeated consistently, becomes armor. Not hard or defensive, but luminous. It's the kind of armor that allows you to face the world unafraid, because you've already found abundance within. Prosperity through coherence. Prosperity is often mistaken for accumulation, more money, more recognition, more comfort. But true prosperity is coherence, the alignment between thought, emotion, and action. It's the state in which your inner world stops contradicting itself. When your mind says one thing, your heart feels another, and your body does a third, you fracture your energy. You live divided, and divided energy cannot create abundance. Prosperity begins when every part of you, belief, feeling, and movement, starts working toward the same direction. Andrew Huberman's studies on neural coherence show that when intention and behavior align, the brain's reward circuitry activates consistently. Dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin form a pattern of stability that sustains focus, motivation, and fulfillment. The paradox is that the more coherent you become, the less external validation you need. You stop chasing the high of approval and start experiencing the calm of authenticity. Prosperity is not a prize you earn. It's a state you enter when you stop betraying yourself. Jordan Peterson explains this through the moral framework of responsibility. Coherence is the reward of integrity, of acting in accordance with what you know to be right, even when it's inconvenient. When your actions align with your principles, your nervous system relaxes. There's no conflict to resolve, no hidden guilt to manage. Clarity becomes your default setting. The Stoics called this eudaimonia, the flourishing of the soul through harmony with virtue. They believed that inner coherence produces outer order, and that no wealth can replace the stability of a well-governed mind. Joe Dispenza translates this into the language of energy. Coherence is frequency alignment. When the brain and heart operate in harmony, their electromagnetic fields synchronize, creating a state measurable in physiology. In this state, your perception sharpens, your intuition strengthens, and opportunities begin to appear where once you saw obstacles. It's not mysticism, it's pattern recognition. The coherent mind notices possibility because it is no longer distracted by internal noise. Faith turns coherence into purpose. It transforms alignment from self-control into surrender, the quiet understanding that you are part of something intelligent and orderly. Descartes might say that coherence is the logical proof of divine structure, reason united with trust. Aristotle would see it as the practice of virtue, the Stoics as the embodiment of logos, divine reason expressed through human choice. Coherence in all traditions is peace in motion. Modern psychology calls this flow state, the seamless merging of awareness and action. When you reach it, effort feels natural, time dissolves, and creativity flows effortlessly. Prosperity, in this sense, is not luck. It's a byproduct of coherence. The world reflects your internal rhythm. When you live in conflict, life resists you. When you live in coherence, life collaborates with you. This alignment is the culmination of every step you've taken. Awareness, discipline, gratitude, courage, and faith converging into harmony. The same circuits that once fueled fear now generate focus. The same energy that once powered self-doubt now sustains creation. You are no longer pushing against life. You are moving with it. That is prosperity, not the possession of things, but the possession of self. When your thoughts, emotions, and actions become one continuous expression of truth, abundance stops being a pursuit and becomes a reflection. Because coherence is the language the universe understands. Clarity without resistance, trust without control, purpose without noise. And when you live in that state, prosperity is no longer something you seek. It's simply where you belong.